Christine Stenning is with the League of Women Voters in Newport County, and a lot to talk about, a lot we could talk about, that's for sure. Certainly want to touch on an event that you just held, a forum with Secretary of State Greg Amore. But first of all, welcome to the Newport This Week video podcast.
Thank you. It's our honor to be here.
Let's kind of touch on just a very basic overview, knowing that we have sort of a limited time frame here to work with. The history of the League of Women Voters and what exactly do you do with the organization as a whole, and particularly with the Newport County chapter?
Good question. We go way, way back. We have over 100 and some years of history. We first became active when the right was added or marched for women to have the right to vote. Since then, the League has picked up concerns about voting and voter registration. And we are, most importantly, we are nonpartisan. We are political, but we are nonpartisan. And I think that makes our voice very different as a nonpartisan organization than many others. Newport County, especially, was very instrumental in the early formation of the League of Women Voters, not just in Rhode Island, but throughout the country. So we have a long history of women standing up for voting rights, voting services, and voter education, and empowering democracy.
You know, it's shocking. You said just, I mean, it's almost unbelievable that in modern times, women's suffrage was not a real thing, and it had to be something to be fought for. It shows, on the one hand, the amount of progress we've made. It also shows some really terrible roots that we've come from in recent times, the tentacles of which continue to reach into some of the challenges we have in our society today in terms of inequity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are so many organizations and so much energy, time, money, effort that are being put into the question of equity for women. And it is amazing to think it's sort of shocking to think that is the case. And literally in this day and time, we feel like we're going backwards on many of those issues that we've come so forward on.
Well, no question. When it comes to reproductive rights, I mean, not only the Roe situation, but also you take a look at what's happening in Alabama. I mean, it is a wild, bizarre, culturally divergent moment. Our focus today is on an advocation that your organization is behind, as well as others, on something that seems so basic, right? Which is same day voter registration for state and local elections. We have it at the presidential level, but not at the state level. And it's something that Secretary of State Greg Amore is pushing for. Held a forum with you and others. And I wonder the big takeaways from that. There's a great article in the paper, but the big takeaways from your standpoint in terms of opposition. It seems like this is one of those boogeyman issues where those who are opposed to same day voter registration think that, somebody's going to steal the election or, whatever the case is. It's that other boogeyman type of approach, it seems.
Yeah, I think that's kind of prevalent, quite frankly, in a lot of politics that we see today. But the interesting thing is that people need to know is that we've had same day registration in the state of Rhode Island. We've had it for the presidential and vice presidential elections. So it's not something that we're reinventing. We have it. Um, Prior to 2020, in an off-season election, a special election, the state did a sort of test to see how secure are we. So they invited the National Guard to come in and try to break through and break into the system and to create some kind of cyber issues. And the National Guard wasn't able to do it. And they sent their best in to try to break the system. Rhode Island has been very progressive and very on safe elections. And so that's a huge part that I think people miss. And even after the 2020 elections, the state of Rhode Island did a movie showing how secure we were. And we were one of the, if not the most secure in the country. So we already have same day voter registration. The quest now from Secretary of More is to make sure that we have it for all elections, not just presidential and vice presidential. So I think that sort of takes some of the bluster out of the boogeyman. Is it something we already have? Questions have been raised. Well, can they walk into a polling booth and pretend they're one person and go to another one and another one? And the answer was no. all of those people who vote, who register to vote on the same day as an election, go to city and town halls, and they are not a burden at the polling stations. Their votes will be counted, and so there's so much mis and disinformation out there on this issue.
As Secretary Amore said during the forum, and as reported in Newport this week in an article by, Phil Colosino wrote this article.
Yes.
The Secretary Amore said the 30-day requirement, which is the current requirement for state and local elections for registration, the 30-day requirement is really arbitrary when you think about the technology we possess and the central voter registration system. We're not faced with an administrative challenge any longer. Why not make voting as accessible as possible? I don't really know of a good argument against this. It's all about accessibility. It's all about opportunity. And I ask you, have you heard a good argument against this initiative?
Not really. First of all, the 30-day regulation, a 30-day waiting period came out after the Civil War. And there was reasons for that, to restrict that kind of voting. But that's been since the Civil War, and we are one of the most binding states when it comes to that. Same day voter registration has been around for 50 or 60 years. 22 different states use it, including DC. So when we had this forum, I wanted to bring out anything. It was more of an educational piece, and so I researched the negative in having same day registration, even though the league already stands in favor of same day voter registration. And so those are some of the questions I popped out to the Secretary of State, and sort of lined him up, and he did a great job. Alicia Vallette from Common Cause was amazing. Um, there are no good, reasonable being the key word there, reasons that same day voter registration in 2024 in modern times shouldn't happen.
There's an interesting parallel with this right now. It's a different conversation, but I think there's an overlap. Ken Block, who is a former gubernatorial candidate, Republican, and then as the moderate
Right.
party candidate, has released a book this week. It's called Disproven, and he was tasked with essentially looking into allegations of voter fraud on behalf of the Trump campaign. What he found wasn't what the Trump campaign wanted to hear, that there was no substantial voter fraud in terms of overturning elections. He did report back, though, and he is a data expert, that's his day job, that his findings found, yeah, there's some voter fraud across the board. This notion that it's only in Democratic states is completely false. You can attribute it to whichever political party's in power. No voting system is perfect, but the idea that we have widespread voter fraud, that we've got thousands of deceased people voting in Rhode Island elections, or that somehow people want to show up at the poll on the same day and vote 2, 3, 4 times using mail ballots, and then they're going to show up and register under a pseudonym, is patently false and frankly disproven. And I wonder, from your standpoint, with a national trend of skepticism towards the integrity of elections, how important is it to you that we have as much access as possible to almost defy the notion that our elections are rigged?
That's a really good question. And you couldn't have hit the nail more on the head, because it is secure. It is those things. And I can't wait to buy his book, actually. I was waiting for it to come out. The Secretary of State referenced it at the forum. It's that whole question of believing or not believing truth, and being able to take truth and twist it to make your effort. I was having a conversation with somebody. We said, in the 60s and 70s, when Walter Cronkite looked you in the eye and told you the news, you knew it was vetted. You knew it was true. You knew that they wouldn't. And it's so different with all the different modalities of news and news media. It's different. I know that the National League of Women Voters is absolutely concerned about this, and they have campaigns in every state to try to make people aware that, in fact, we are secure. Our elections are very secure. And I think we're going to see in Georgia and other places where we see from the 2020 election that it is absolutely false that our system can be hacked the way that was hacked. And quite frankly, in Rhode Island, when we had the little bit of a scandal about the dead people voting, where they were on the rolls, they didn't vote. I mean, no, but there were people on the rolls that were deceased. but they didn't attempt, nobody attempted to vote on their behalf. So, it's how do you read the material? How do you see what's really going on? And Secretary Amore has done an amazing job of making sure that people hear and know the truth with the big T.
Yeah, super well said. I completely agree. Christine Stenning, League of Women Voters of Newport County, excellent work. Thank you for what you're doing for the community. Again, going back to the first conversation or portion of this conversation, the idea that women's suffrage is not something that's been, you know, in place for since the beginning of time is it's just a shocking thought, and that we got a lot of work to do as a society because we still have those roots across the board, and you're doing a lot of that heavy lifting, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And it's not just unique to the United States. Women have been fighting for women's rights for a long time. The Chinese tea house that sits on Cliff Walk, it's there because during the time that the United States women suffrage movement was going, it was the same thing was happening in China. That's why that's there. And so it's the world has a lot of work to do. But specifically, right now, our task is Rhode Island and the United States.
This is the Newport This Week video podcast series every week at newportthisweek.com and on the Newport This Week YouTube channel. I'm Bill Bartholomew. We'll talk to you next week.